Welcome everyone to our Good Friday service for high school students and parents and other people that might be watching. Every year we take just a few minutes on Friday to reflect on the week that has been and to put in perspective the weekend that is to come ahead of us this weekend. And wanted to start off this evening by asking you a question about movies. If you're anything like me, you really enjoy movies and you've probably had quite some time to catch up on movies over these past few weeks. But let me ask you, what was the last movie that you saw that will be very memorable for you for a very long time? So in other words, when was the last time you went into a theater, watched a movie, and had something happen to you emotionally, or you connected to what was going on screen that will stick with you for a very long time? As you can tell by the posters behind me, my family, my wife and I, we are big fans of superhero movies. And it seemed like not too long ago, my wife and I were sitting in a theater watching Avengers Endgame, the culmination of 10 years worth of storytelling for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and watching Tony Stark at the end of the movie. If you haven't seen it, spoiler, it's coming, but hopefully you have. Take all Infinity Stones away from Thanos and put it on his hand and say, "I am Iron Man," and snap, and wins the ultimate battle. And in doing so, he sacrifices himself, which has been against his character storyline the entire 10 years, to be the guy that would make the sacrifice. And I remember sitting in the theater, just my eyes filled with tears, because that was his story, and what his legacy was going to be had been completely changed from the first part of the movies. And there's something about storytelling and going to the movies that, for whatever reason, really hits us to our core, and a good story being told really can connect us and get to the heart and the core of who we are. For those of you that are in high school, my senior year was 2004, which is 16 years ago, which is crazy to think about. But I only ever skipped school one time in my 4 years of high school. And I'm not condoning it. I'm just letting you know what happened. And there was a movie that came out that I really, really wanted to see. And so I skipped school with one of my best friends. And we went into theaters and we saw a movie called The Passion of the Christ. And it is an incredible story. It is a moving story, and it is essentially the documentation of the Good Friday story and the last few hours of the life of Jesus. And they spare no expense and they spare no detail, and they tell the story of Jesus. And it was in those moments that I realized the story of Good Friday really is one that is not focused on very much except for once a year, and is so powerful and so moving. And so it's our goal today to tell you that story, and for you to have a full understanding of what the last few hours of the life of Jesus looked like. We talk about Jesus almost in ways that we talk about superheroes, that he had these great abilities, that he had powerful speeches. But one of the things that we often forget about is the human side of Jesus that we're going to see here as we tell the story of Good Friday and what happened on this day almost 2,000 years ago. So with that being said, I would encourage you to sit back, to get your Bible ready, and to join us on this journey of learning about the last few hours of the life of Jesus on this Good Friday. So here to help me tell that story are some of my friends, and I hope that you will tune in, focus, and enjoy the storytelling of my friends as we learn about the last few hours of the life of Jesus on Good Friday.
When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it.
They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch."
Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will."
An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. In being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground.
Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him with their hands.
The men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, "Prophesy, who hit you?" And they said many other insulting things to him.
And they began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they were striking him with a reed, and spitting on him, and kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak, and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him.
As they led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put a cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him.
They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it.
Two other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing."
Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads, saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself."
After this, when Jesus knew that everything was now finished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, he said, "I'm thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was sitting there, so they filled a sponge of sour wine on a hyssop branch and held it to his mouth. When Jesus received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." Now bowing his head, he gave up his spirit.
It was now about the 6th hour, and darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. For the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last.
With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and saw how he had died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God."
hopefully for you, that journey was a bit of a wake-up call, or maybe for some of you, it was for the first time a full understanding of what the process was that Jesus went through in those last few hours of his life. And I want to take just a few minutes this evening to interject ourselves into this story and what I think is a very critical and crucial part in this story, the last few hours of the life of Jesus. And I want to focus in on a brief moment that we get a few other people involved other than Jesus in this story. And so I want to read along with you. If you have your Bibles, you can turn there to Luke chapter 23. And I'm going to read starting in verse 32 because I want for us to see ourselves and for us to see other people in the story of Good Friday and what Good Friday can mean for us. The question that always gets asked is, how could a day that seems so bad be labeled so good for all of us? And I want to just take a few minutes to turn our attention to this story and what it potentially means for us by looking at what it means for a few other people in this story. So let me read for you out of the CSB translation, Luke 23, starting in verse 32. It says this: 2 others, criminals, were also led away to be executed with him. Now let me pause there. In my translation, and hopefully in yours too, it says 2 others, and then it denotes that those 2 were actually criminals, because the death that Jesus dies was reserved for punishment for criminals. And even though he is not guilty of anything, he is being executed just like a criminal. In fact, in the story of Good Friday, a true criminal is offered up to the crowd and they take him over Jesus. So 2 others, criminals, were also led away to be executed with him. And when they arrived at the place called the Skull, or Golgotha, they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on the right and one on the left. Now, I want for you to understand, crucifixion was a very gruesome and awful way to die. And in fact, most people who died of crucifixion didn't die from the pain of being crucified, of putting nails in hands and feet. They often died of suffocation or asphyxiation from running out of breath or fluid buildup in their lungs, and they would drown in the fluid in their lungs. And it was a very long, gruesome, agonizing death, and that's what's happening right here. And we find out Jesus isn't the only one that it's happening to, but there are a person on his left and his right as well. Verse 34, then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, because they do not know what they're doing. Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing. And they divided his clothes and cast lots. The people stood watching, and even the leaders were scoffing. He saved others. Let him save himself if this is God's Messiah, the chosen one. The soldiers, they also mocked him. They came offering him sour wine and said, if you are the king of the Jews, then save yourself. Verse 38, an inscription was above him, this is the King of the Jews. And verse 39 is where I want for us to land at tonight. And it says this, then one of the criminals hanging there began to yell insults at Jesus. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. So we have the religious leaders who are there. We have the people in the crowd who are there, and they are yelling and hurling insults at Jesus, making fun of him, mocking him, questioning who he is and what he can do. And one of the criminals that's hanging next to him on a cross joins in the choir of insults and mockery and says, if this were you, you were really who you say you are, you could get yourself off of this thing. You could get yourself out of this situation. Save yourself. And he also throws in, you could save yourself and you could save us too. It's a key part there. you could save yourself and you could save us too. He wants rescued from his situation. Verse 40, but the other criminal answered, rebuking him, shutting him down, essentially scolding him. He said, don't you even fear God, since you are undergoing the same punishment? We are punished justly because we're getting back what we deserve for the things that we did. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said to Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, he said, truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. And here's one of the most fascinating parts of this story, is that we have a criminal on the left and on the right. And one of them has a completely terrible perspective, and the other one on the right has an incredibly gracious and remorseful perspective, and moments of clarity in suffering and in pain. And the last words one criminal gets to speak are accusations and mocking and judgment. And then the other criminal, we get asking for grace and forgiveness, even in his last moments of his life. What a unique perspective. What an incredible thing to have happen, to have these two different narratives happening right on each side of Jesus. And Jesus, being the person that he was, looks over to that one and he says, today you'll be with me in paradise, extending forgiveness to the criminal on the cross. What a powerful scene, what a powerful story and narrative to read and be a part of. I want for us to take just a few seconds to realize the perspectives that exist in this story. And I want for you to understand that for each person in this story, the cross that they're being crucified on, it means something different to each person that's hanging there. In fact, the cross that each one of them are hanging on all represent different meanings and different situations in their life, and has a different value and has a different thing for each one of them. And here's what I mean. I want for you, let's just go down and look at each person that's hanging there on a cross, being crucified in this spot. First of all, for the first criminal who's speaking anger and judgment and mocking Jesus, the cross has a meaning for him where he's at right now. And the cross means to him that this is the end of his life. And it shows. He knows that he can do nothing to get out of this situation, that he can't do anything to get rid of what's going on. And so we see anger, and we see fear, and we see hurting, we see mockery and judgment and a terrible attitude. And this person knows this is the end of his life, and he freaks out and just lashes out at anyone who's close. Makes sense. If you knew you couldn't do anything to save yourself, you would probably be very scared as well. And for the other criminal who's on the other side of Jesus, the cross means in this moment he gets a shot at a fresh start. And even though he's going to only be alive for a couple more hours, he recognizes that the cross, this moment right here, means his shot at a fresh start. He gets to have all of the wrongs that he's done, all of his mistakes and his mess-ups forgiven and eliminated and to be not held against him. And so there's some awareness that he has that this is his moment, that the cross means he could be forgiven of the things that he had done. Well, and let's not forget our third person hanging there on the cross, being crucified, is Jesus. And the cross for Jesus has a meaning as well. And there are books and novels and Bible studies that have been written on what the cross means for Jesus. But I just want to pare it down to one small thing for you to grasp as we talk about what these means. And the cross for Jesus represents the finish of his earthly ministry. means that everything that he has done since he was born is now coming to this moment, and it is the culmination, it is the finish, and it is the end of his earthly ministry, because he is going to breathe his last here in the next few moments. And the cross means the end of his earthly ministry, but it also means the start of the future as well. It means the start of the future of a lot of things for a lot of people, and it means the start of this incredible ultimate plan that God has been orchestrating and making happen since really the beginning of all of this. Jesus being on the cross has a meaning for even Jesus in that moment, and it's an incredibly powerful thing. Now, in this story, there's a fourth person that I'd like for you to consider as we read this story. And the fourth person is you, and is me, and is all of us as people who are reading this story. The fourth person in this story is the person who is reading it and getting to take advantage of being able to be a part of this story even though they weren't there. And I want for you to finish with me this last part of Luke chapter 23. Starting in verse 44, it says this: "It was about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3, because the sun's light failed. The curtain of the sanctuary was split down the middle, and Jesus called out with a loud voice, 'Father, into your hands I entrust my spirit.' Saying this, he breathed his last." Jesus, realizing that the fight is over with, that the moment is over with here, says in a conversation with God and a prayer to God, "I'm coming back to you, receive my spirit." And he takes one last breath, and then it's over with. Jesus is dead. When the centurion saw what happened, he began to glorify God, saying, "This man really was righteous." I want for you to think for a second. What does the cross mean for you? We talked about for these three people, the two criminals and Jesus, that the cross means something for each one of them. And let me just ask you where you're at in your life right now, in either following Jesus or trying to live out your life for Jesus. What does the cross mean for you? Here's what I just want to offer it for you, for your consideration. I think for us today, as people sitting in 2020 and in our homes, trying to figure out life, what this life looks like, the cross means a couple things. One, just like for the first criminal, the cross means the end of life as we know it. If we will put our hope in Jesus, and we can recognize that even on a day where it seems like such awful things could be happening, how could it be such a good Friday? How could we call it that? It's because we can know that the cross has meaning for us. And it means first and foremost that this is the end of our life as we know it. And when we trust God and what happens on the cross, we know that because of the cross, we no longer have to live in fear. That we no longer have to operate out of anger or bitterness. That because of the cross, it's the end of our life, but we don't have to have fear or bitterness, that there's something else that is coming. And secondly, the cross means for us that we have a chance at a fresh start. That the old life that we had no longer has to be held against us. That Jesus, what he did on the cross and what the cross stands for and represents, is that it's the chance for all of us to have a fresh start at life. I don't know about you, but there are many things in my story that I hope no one ever knows about, that I'm not proud of. And the cross means that we don't have to have those things held against us anymore. Finally, from Jesus' perspective, the cross, it means this. And I want for you to, if you're still watching and still paying attention, if you don't understand anything else from what I've talked about today, on Good Friday, the cross means for us, because of Jesus, the cross means that this is the end of death being the end of our life. Let me say it again. The cross means that this is the end of death being the end of life. Because what Jesus did for us by being crucified on a cross, by being the perfect sacrifice, that our sins are forgiven, and because of him and his death for us, it is the end of death being the end of life for us. So here's what I would like for you to consider doing. If you go to social media, and most of you are going to over the next few hours, you're going to get on Snapchat or you're going to get on Instagram, and you're going to look around and you're going to consume that content that is on there that people are posting. We want for you to maybe take what could be a bad day for somebody and potentially give them hope, and for you to actively participate in today being a Good Friday for people. So here's what we would love for you to do. If you go to our Instagram, Fuse FCC, and you click on our story, there's going to be a picture of a cross. And I'm going to put what it looks like right here. There will be a picture of a cross, and it'll be blank. And here's what we would love for you to do. In the white space that is on that cross, we would love for you to download or screenshot that cross and just put in some text about what the cross means to you. That on Good Friday, what the death of Jesus means to you. And fill it in that white part of the cross. And then we'd love for you to post it on your story and tag a few people and challenge them to share what the cross means for them. And we would encourage you to post on your next part of your story a blank slide so your friends can download it. And your friends can also share what they have and challenge them to do the same thing. Let's do our best to make today, Good Friday, truly represent the hope that even though Jesus died on the cross, that is not the end. Because as most of us know, Friday is not the end of the story. And then a lot can happen in just a few days. And so maybe for all of us, we could do our part in sharing the good news. And it starts with the good that comes from Good Friday. May you be blessed. May you continue to have this conversation. I would love to see on your stories what the cross means for you. I love you guys. Have a great weekend. And remember, Sunday's coming.